comfort care with her family. Let's talk to Michael Johns. He's a former speechwriter for George Bush Sr., joins us from Philadelphia. A remarkable woman, wasn't she?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the role of First Lady, and this has been, I think, true throughout, modern times in the United States, is one that requires incredible strength. I mean, and Barbara Bush, in many respects, was one of the greatest First Ladies we've ever had. She stood by her husband throughout a great number of significant positions. She contributed significantly on her own to literacy, which she felt very passionate about. She was engaged in speaking about that very extensively and bringing the country's attention to the importance of it. And in many respects, I mean, lived a life of just, extraordinary accomplishment. And I think if you look at her comments and you look at her remarks through the years, they keep coming back to the importance of family and the importance of relationships of those close to you. And I think you can judge her legacy in many respects by this extraordinary family she leaves behind. If a husband who was the 41st president of the United States, a son who was the 43rd president of the United States, a governor of the state, three other children actually that are accomplished in many respects, and a great number of grandchildren who are equally extraordinary. I mean, it's quite an incredible family. And her role in it, I think, has been acknowledged by just about everyone.
Yes, a remarkable dynasty, isn't it? The name carries so much weight. In terms of her role as First Lady, how did she take on that role, and how did she really turn it into her own role?
Well, the biggest significant change was that she took on this issue of literacy, and every First Lady in the United States typically has had an issue or two that they brought to the attention of the nation. As you may recall, before her, First Lady in the Reagan administration had Nancy Reagan, who brought extraordinary attention to the drug problem in the United States and trying to encourage particularly youth to say no to drugs. And she made this shift onto literacy, which continued to focus to a great extent on American youth. And she stood by her husband throughout the Iran-Contra scandal, which a lot of people have maybe forgotten over time, but it was an incredibly stressful time for former President Bush, and also stood by him throughout the first Iraq War, which was an incredibly stressful and contentious political moment here in the United States. And I think in many respects, as President Bush acknowledged many times, she really helped get him through some difficult times. And his career, even up before becoming vice president, as anyone will know, was incredible. I mean, this man was ambassador to China. He ran the CIA. He ran the Republican National Committee. I mean, he was an incredibly accomplished individual politically and in many respects, and in very high stress positions in the country. And she was a great bedrock for the president and for that entire family.
Yes, a great bedrock, a 73-year marriage, a remarkable achievement in itself. As a person, just tell us a little bit about what she was like as a person, away from the limelight.
Well, she was very focused on relationships. Those that came into her universe and her world typically remained in it. She was a very compassionate person. She emphasized the importance of personal relationships throughout a lifetime and how significant they are. She was, I think, really a bedrock of strength. She may not have always projected that because she didn't feel the obligation to necessarily, but she was a strong woman in the sense that she encouraged, her husband in a lot of these fights, stood by him. She shared her viewpoints passionately and strongly. She was a great mother, I think. If you look back at George W. Bush and particularly a lot of the biographies that emerged on him since his presidency, incredibly engaged with kind of straightening his life out at the age of 40, when he really turned around a life that was not going in a particularly positive direction in a lot of respects. And she engaged, with him, and really was a force in, along with many others, in getting him to kind of really have a whole new, fresh start to his life.
Not just with him, but with all the family, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously Jeb Bush, governor of Florida, was a serious presidential contender. Many thought actually would be the nominee at the beginning of the 2016 campaign. Was incredibly involved in her development. Very encouraging and inspiring, and and her grandchildren are just equally as extraordinary. I mean, many of them engaged in media and in politics, and uh, on a great road. All of them speak highly of her role as a grandparent, and it's significant. I mean, I think her legacy that she leaves behind, it's always difficult to summarize that quickly, but it will be her family. And if you look throughout the years, that was the one message she continually communicated to people, was the importance of keeping your family and your friendships close, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And I think a lot of people heard that now as they reflect back on this extraordinary life that she's lived. That's certainly an important message, and one she held on to at the very end.
Michael, you were George Bush's senior former speechwriter. How much input did Barbara Bush have in the way he presented himself, his message to the American people, to the rest of the world, in fact?
I think Barbara Bush, in a lot of ways, urged him to be strong against political opposition and yet to maintain decency in political dialogue. And I think it's one thing that all of us who worked with President Bush, and that many of us miss now in the current toxic political environment of the United States, was to maintain this, level of decency even with political opponents. And she was a believer in that. She believed the conversation and that dialogue, discussion could open a lot of doors. She did not believe in this idea of permanent enemies or an inevitable ideology clash in the country. And yet she stood for a great number of principles that were generally, very much aligned with those of her husband.
Michael Johns, former speechwriter for George Bush Sr., thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your experiences and your memories of the late Barbara Bush. Thank you very much for your time.